Alarms rose as the earnings call opened, and the market stared like a hard, bright eye. The narrator said silence breaks when fear speaks first. Logan Pierce said, "We will proceed with guidance." A leaked memo flashed, and headlines stacked like falling cards. Claire Dalton said, "Meet this head on and do not flinch." Maria Brooks said, "Verify the files before one more word." Tickers bled red while bored whispers cracked across chat windows. The narrator said, "Every ally looked like an angle of risk." Eli Turner said, "These access times are wrong." Dana Collins said, "People on the floor are scared." Logan said, "Find the breach and lock it down." Phones trembled on the table like trapped insects, and the room held its breath. The narrator said, "A call becomes a trial when the jury is the market." Logan said, "We will address the memo and show our work." Reporters crowded the queue with sharp, fast questions. Maria said, "State facts and defer guesses." Claire said, "Move first and make speed our shield." A regulator asked for raw files with audit trails. The narrator said, "Each answer made the floor feel thin." Logan said, "Numbers stand and proof is coming." The chat filled with board notes and clipped doubts. The clock blinked, and the storm outside pushed hard against the glass. The narrator said, "Doubt moved like a stain across bright glass." Eli said, "There's a pattern in these logins around 2 a.m. Maria said, "Send the timestamps and the device IDs." Claire said, "Speed, not fear, will keep us standing." Logan said, "Show the first breach and the path after it." A director texted that a rival was circling. The narrator said, "Predators move when blood hits water." Dana said, "People need to hear from you now." Logan said, "Tell them help is here and work is moving." The timer rolled past the hour while the room held tight. The narrator said, "Old lessons came with quiet weight." Harold Whitman said, "Take the first loss if that stops worse loss." Logan said, "If we bend now, we break later." Maria said, "A clean room audit is the only safe road." Claire said, "Push guidance and drown the noise with work." Rain rattled on the glass like a clock with no pause. The narrator said, "Every choice cut a new path across the map." Logan said, "We audit and we speak today." Harold said, "Choose what you can live with when this ends." The narrator said, "Plans are a kind of courage when the ground shakes." Logan said, "We will open our books and set a bait file." Maria said, "Legal will frame every step and keep chain of custody." Claire said, "Make speed our story and do not let fear write it." A director asked, "Can we last this hour?" The ticker slipped again, and the room did not move. The narrator said, "Some faith leaves like steam on glass." Logan said, "Isolate access and watch for the first bite." Eli said, "The trap is ready." The plan slid into motion while the storm pressed at the edges. The narrator said, "Morning opened with cold light and hard choices." Logan Pierce said, "Freeze spending that we do not need today." Maria Brooks said, "We must preserve cash and protect covenants." Claire Dalton said, "Announce a bold pivot and seize the story." Eli Turner said, "The first breach used a vendor token." Dana Collins said, "People fear layoffs if the stock keeps falling." The narrator said, "Pressure bent voices and made plans sharp." Harold Whitman said, "Cut once and cut clean." Logan said, "We launch the clean room audit now." Maria said, "Chain of custody will be strict and written." The narrator said, "Outside." Outside, sirens crossed wet streets while phones rang without rest. The narrator said, "Banks asked for proof, not hope." A lender on speaker said, "Send variance files and raw logs today." Maria Brooks said, "You will have them by noon." Claire Dalton said, "Offer a revenue sprint with prepaid deals." Logan Pierce said, "Only if terms do not break us." Eli Turner said, The access pattern points to two machines. Dana Collins said, staff beg for a message they can trust. Harold Whitman said, a short letter beats a loud speech. Logan said, we will tell them what we know. The narrator said, the room steadied as the storm tapped the glass, and a thin plan took shape. The narrator said, the clean room spun up like a sealed vessel. Logan Pierce said, no outside devices and no side channels. Maria Brooks said, two attorneys will log each handoff. Claire Dalton said, while they dig, we push a product fix. Eli Turner said, I found a script that scrapes meeting notes. Dana Collins said, someone copied staff calendars at dawn. Logan said, quarantine the accounts now. Harold Whitman said, pride ruins good defense. The narrator said, every keystroke felt washed by fate. Logan said, we hold the line today, then we strike. The narrator said, across the river, the rival laid plans of his own. Victor Kane said, file the intent for a hostile bid. A counsel on call said, the shadow fund is ready. Evelyn Cross said, timing is the night. Wait until they pause. Logan Pierce said, they will come when we look down. Maria Brooks said, we need a rights plan in draft. Claire Dalton said, let them swing and then rush. The narrator said, quiet rooms held loud futures. Harold Whitman said, you cannot fight smoke with mirrors. Logan said, we fight with proof and time. The narrator said, night fell, but work did not. Eli Turner said, the scraper ran from a device in the executive wing. Maria Brooks said, we will secure warrants for the logs. Claire Dalton said, announce a sprint demo at sunrise. Logan Pierce said, we show progress and we show control. Dana Collins said, teams will stay if they hear truth. Harold Whitman said, rest buys clarity. Borrow an hour if you can. Logan said, I will not sleep until we see the path. The narrator said, the office hummed like a held breath as the trap waited for teeth. The narrator said, morning light revealed cracks that were small and sharp. Eli Turner said, two accounts used the same token within minutes. Maria Brooks said, document the path and lock the drives. Claire Dalton said, ship a patch and change the story. Logan Pierce said, place the bait log and mirror the traffic. Dana Collins said, rumors say heads will roll. Harold Whitman said, fear spends truth faster than lies. Noah Reed said, a laptop on the executive wing pinged our decoy. Logan said, quarantine it now and keep the circle tight. The narrator said, a quiet alarm traveled the halls and did not stop. The narrator said, a board subgroup met with cameras off and doubts on. Maria Brooks said, we have custody logs for each file touch. Logan Pierce said, we will show them within the hour. Claire Dalton said, offer a roadmap that doubles speed. Harold Whitman said, a rushed map leads off a cliff. An anonymous email arrived with clipped threats. Victor Kane said, their time window is closing. Evelyn Cross said, press when they ask for mercy. The narrator said, words traded weight like bonds in a storm. The narrator said, staff gathered for a town hall that tasted like metal. Logan Pierce said, we will open the books and protect jobs where we can. Dana Collins said, people want proof and a date, not a promise. Claire Dalton said, we have a build that ships this week. Maria Brooks said, the audit will certify the numbers we present. Eli Turner said the attack used calendar notes and voice files. Logan said, we are sealing those doors now. The narrator said, relief did not come, but focus did. The room exhaled, thin and slow. The narrator said, the sting drew a hand from the dark. Noah Reed said, the decoy was opened from a device near the board suites. Maria Brooks said, secure the device and record the chain. Claire Dalton said, this is our cue to sprint the release. Eli Turner said, the same user scraped 2 private folders. Logan Pierce said, do not touch the suspect. Watch the path. Harold Whitman said, proof must stand when anger fades. The narrator said, the circle grew smaller, and the air felt thin. The narrator said, night leaned against glass while plans shifted outside their walls. Victor Kane said, the bid lands when their voice breaks. Evelyn Cross said, hold an hour, then strike it open. Logan Pierce said, we talked to the board before dawn. Maria Brooks said, the findings reached them first. Claire Dalton said, launch the demo at sunrise and set the tone. Eli Turner said, alerts will page me if the decoy trips again. Harold Whitman said, choose the fight you can finish. The narrator said, silence gathered like a witness. The narrator said, Dawn found the team ready to flip the game. Logan Pierce said, start the clean room audit, mirror each file. Maria Brooks said, every touch gets logged and witnessed. Claire Dalton said, we ship the patch at noon and seize the feed. Eli Turner said, the scraper rides meeting notes and calendar links. Noah Reed said, the decoy will flag any hidden route. Harold Whitman said, caution wins more days than noise. Dana Collins said, staff want a single message before lunch. Logan said, they will have it in writing and in plain words. The narrator said, outside, the city shook off the rain, and inside, a plan woke with hard edges. The narrator said, the bait file moved like a whisper through wires. Eli Turner said, mirrors are live and alerts are armed. Maria Brooks said, legal is in the room for each handoff. Logan Pierce said, send a staff letter with clear steps and firm tone. Dana Collins said, they want dates, not weather. Claire Dalton said, announce the noon patch and the sunset demo. Harold Whitman said, promise less and deliver more. Noah Reed said, one untagged device is probing our map. Logan said, let it look and mark the trail. The narrator said, patient sat at the table and did not blink. The narrator said, by noon the patch waited on a thin wire. Claire Dalton said, go live and flood the feed with progress. Logan Pierce said, if it breaks, we own it in seconds. Maria Brooks said, statement is ready with clean audit language. Eli Turner said, heat maps show interest near the board suites. Noah Reed said, the decoy saw a handshake from that wing. Dana Collins said, floor teams need one face at the mic. Harold Whitman said, lead with proof and keep breath slow. Logan said, I will speak, and then we ship the demo. The narrator said, the company stood at a small cliff, and the drop was quiet. The narrator said, across town, rivals set teeth on steel. Victor Kane said, file the notice and ready the bid. Evelyn Cross said, when they exhale, we press. A banker said, funding is waiting for a soft moment. Logan Pierce said, we keep a rights plan in our pocket. Maria Brooks said, draft is done if the board must act. Claire Dalton said, announce the sunrise demo to frame the open. Harold Whitman said, you cannot outrun truth, only meet it sooner. Noah Reed said, our decoy is still a light in the dark. The narrator said, two tides move toward one shore. The narrator said, evening drew a line between talk and proof. Logan Pierce said, we will run the demo at first light. Maria Brooks said, regulators get the audit packet at 6. Claire Dalton said, push a roadmap that shows speed and control. Eli Turner said, the mirror will catch the next touch on the decoy. Noah Reed said, I set alerts for any off-hours handoff. Dana Collins said, teams will stay late if they see progress. Harold Whitman said, sleep is a tactic. Borrow some. Logan said, I will stand the watch tonight. The narrator said, the lights dimmed, not the resolve. The narrator said, the trap finally bit and did not let go. Noah Reed said, the decoy was opened from the executive wing at 2:14. Eli Turner said, the same device pushed copies to an external drive. Maria Brooks said, record the chain and seal the room. Logan Pierce said, no one moves until we know who touched it. Claire Dalton said, this is a stall that bleeds time. Harold Whitman said, speed is a mask when fear leads. Dana Collins said, people feel the shake in their desks. Logan said, we follow proof, and only proof. The narrator said, on the screen, a simple breadcrumb turned into a road that led inward. Eli said, the user mapped to a keycard from our floor. Noah said, it points to a name we all know. The narrator said, the board gathered for a quiet storm. Maria Brooks said, here are the logs, the chain, and the access path. Eli Turner said, this device touched the bait and moved data twice. Noah Reed said, the card owner is in the executive circle. Claire Dalton said, we should focus on the patch and not this sideshow. Harold Whitman said, truth does not wait for comfort. Logan Pierce said, Logan, name the owner of the card. Eli said, the mapping shows Claire. The narrator said, silence arrived like a locked door. Dana Collins said, people trust what you choose now. Logan said, we will verify one more time. Maria said, verification is complete. The narrator said, with the name on the table, the room thinned of hope. Logan Pierce said, Claire, say it is wrong and help us fix it. Claire Dalton said, this company needed a shove you would never give. Maria Brooks said, you routed files to an outside fund. Eli Turner said, the timestamps align with your keycard and your VPN. Noah Reed said, a burner phone pinged near your office. Harold Whitman said, a crown cut from the inside still draws blood. Dana Collins said, people only wanted the truth. Claire said, the truth is a stronger hand took shape while you slept. The narrator said, Logan looked at the table and saw a blade he had missed. Logan said, you chose our rivals. Claire said, I chose survival. The narrator said, across town, the rivals smiled into a dark window. Victor Kane said, the chair will fold once she opens the door. Evelyn Cross said, we wired support to land it open. Logan Pierce said, you sold us our own fear. Claire Dalton said, you drove us toward a cliff and called it vision. Maria Brooks said, we move for suspension pending full review. Harold Whitman said, mercy is not the same as trust. Eli Turner said, mirrors are still live on the decoy. Noah Reed said, any hand that touches it now will glow. Dana Collins said, tell staff before rumors finish the job. The narrator said, two paths raced, and only one kept the lights on. The narrator said, the board moved like surgeons with dull light. Maria Brooks said, a motion to suspend access and recover devices now. Logan Pierce said, we seek an injunction against the hostile bid. Claire Dalton said, you will lose with or without me. Harold Whitman said, end the leak before you fight a war. Eli Turner said, the demo can still anchor the morning. Noah Reed said, security is staged at the executive wing. Dana Collins said, tell the floor what we do, not what we hope. Logan said, we will speak at dawn and show proof. The narrator said, the night held no comfort, only a straight line of tasks and a thin promise of control. The narrator said, morning came with sharp light and sharper choices. Logan Pierce said, we meet, we vote, We stand by proof. Maria Brooks said, the injunction filings are signed and ready. Claire Dalton said, your paper shield will not stop a tide. Eli Turner said, the mirrors still show the same path. Noah Reed said, the decoy logs match the keycard map. Harold Whitman said, speak plain and breathe slow. Dana Collins said, staff wait for one clear answer. A director said, we will hear both sides, then we decide. The narrator said, across the river, a rival waited with a calm smile. Victor Kane said, when they reach for air, we close. The room settled into heavy silence like a courtroom before the door locks. The narrator said, counsel read the rules like a decree. Maria Brooks said each director will state their vote aloud. Logan Pierce said before we begin, you must see this final trace. Eli Turner said, the copy job ran again at 4:3. Noah Reed said, the device was near the executive wing. Claire Dalton said, you still fear speed more than loss. Harold Whitman said, rage is not proof. Dana Collins said, staff hear the echo of this room in every hallway. A director said, time is up. Victor Kane said, our offer stands at open. The narrator said, the table felt like a scale, and every glance weighed more than words. The narrator said, proof arrived like a quiet hammer. Eli Turner said, this is the screenshot from the decoy. Noah Reed said, a transfer window shows a route to an outside drive. Maria Brooks said, chain of custody is intact from start to now. Logan Pierce said, this is our case. Claire Dalton said, your fear made this trap, not wisdom. Harold Whitman said, the past is a teacher when you let it hurt. Dana Collins said, people will follow only if the line is clear. A director said, we move to the question. Victor Kane said from the screen, you have 1 hour before our terms change. The narrator said, breath slowed. Pens clicked. The vote came closer than the air. The narrator said, the chair called the count. A director said on the motion to suspend Claire, state yes or no. Maria Brooks said yes. Logan Pierce said, yes. Logan director said, yes. Claire Dalton said, this board fears its own shadow. Harold Whitman said, yes. A director said, no. The narrator said, the word moved around the circle like a slow wheel. Dana Collins said, people will learn this within minutes. Eli Turner said, logs will remain sealed until court. Noah Reed said, mirrors will keep watching. The chair said, the motion carries. The room exhaled like a tired engine. The narrator said, silence lingered after the vote like a long shadow. Claire Dalton said, you think this ends here? Logan Pierce said, we end the leak and face the bid. Maria Brooks said, the court will see our record within the hour. Victor Kane said, our terms harden at the bell. Harold Whitman said, hold your voice steady when the door opens. Dana Collins said, staff will want to know who we are now. Eli Turner said, alerts are quiet for the moment. Noah Reed said, I will watch the wings. The narrator said, papers slid into envelopes. Hands shook once. A small storm passed through the room and left a colder sky. The narrator said, dawn reached the glass like a slow verdict. Logan Pierce said, we speak once and we stand by proof. Maria Brooks said, the court filing is live and the notice is served. Victor Kane said from a screen, the bid opens with the bell. Claire Dalton said, you can vote me out, but you cannot stop the flood. Harold Whitman said, hold the center and let the noise pass. Dana Collins said, people wait for a promise they can touch. Eli Turner said, mirrors are quiet and the path is clean. Noah Reed said, security is tight at every door. The narrator said, the company held its breath and reached for a steadier sky. Logan said, we lead with proof. Then we build, the narrator said. The town hall began with clear light and tired eyes. Logan Pierce said, we found the breach and we sealed it. Maria Brooks said, evidence is with the court and the board. Dana Collins said, tell them who we are now. Eli Turner said, we will publish the security plan by noon. Claire Dalton said, you trade vision for fear and call it duty. Harold Whitman said, a company is a promise kept in hard wind. Noah Reed said, monitoring runs on every wing. The narrator said, hands rose with blunt questions and heavy need. Logan said, you will see progress and you will see it today. The narrator said, the rival made his move while the echo still hung. Victor Kane said, our terms close in 1 hour. Evelyn Cross said, sign now and walk with the crown intact. Maria Brooks said, their debt loads you with anchors. Logan Pierce said, we can stand if we hold the line. Claire Dalton said, your pride costs more than any bid. Harold Whitman said, choose the loss you can carry. Dana Collins said, the floor will follow proof, not threats. Eli Turner said, the demo is ready to show. The narrator said, the city noise rose and fell like tide against steel. The narrator said at open, the screen screamed scream choice. Maria Brooks said, the injunction slows their hand. Logan Pierce said, release the demo now. Eli Turner said, deploying. Dana Collins said, deploying. Staff chat is filling with hope and doubt. Claire Dalton said, your show cannot stop the tide. Noah Reed said, mirrors are clean and no new touches. Harold Whitman said, this is the part where you breathe. Victor Kane said, last call to take our terms. The narrator said, the demo ran smooth and a quiet cheer rose from the floor. Logan said, we stand and we build. The narrator said, evening settled with a hard, clean edge. Victor Kane said, we withdraw and return when wind favors us. Evelyn Cross said, the door is never closed. Maria Brooks said, we hold the line and rebuild trust. Claire Dalton said, you saved the seat and lost what made you bold. Harold Whitman said, survival changes a crown and the one who wears it. Dana Collins said, the floor will remember this day. Eli Turner said, systems are clear and logs are sealed. Noah Reed said, the watch goes on. The narrator said, Logan signed the last page and felt the weight of every line. Logan Pierce said, we go forward.